When my father said it, everyone laughed. At least the Air Force pays her rent. He didn't even look at me, just raised his glass and let the room laugh at me. Not with me. The sound was sharp, polished, effortless, like humiliation wrapped in champagne bubbles. I stood there, smiling the way soldiers do when they're bleeding but can't show it. He didn't know that the uniform he mocked had already buried 3 of my men. He didn't know that the contract he was bragging about was built on their blood. My name is Danielle Adams. And that night, when his glass hit the floor, he finally realized who he'd been laughing at. I never knew silence could be this loud. It echoed beneath the golden lights of Union Center, humming through the clink of glasses and the polished laughter of men who thought they owned the room. At the center stood the man I once called my father, his smile as rehearsed as a closing deal. He was telling another story, my story, something he thought would entertain them. Their laughter rose and fell, smooth and effortless, like champagne spilling over crystal. I stood near the back, half-shadowed, my hand resting on the polished hilt of my ceremonial sword. Every sound, the rustle of silk gowns, the hum of conversation, faded until there was only the memory of his voice from 2 decades ago. I could still hear him saying I'd come crawling home. He was wrong. I never crawled back. I took flight and never looked down. Now, the man who once measured my worth in dollars was about to learn how expensive regret could be. The host's voice cut through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brigadier General Danielle Adams, United States Air Force." The laughter died instantly. A single glass slipped from my father's hand and shattered against the marble. I walked toward the stage, light striking the metals on my chest. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was closure. And tonight, in a room full of power, real power belonged to the one person he never believed would have it. I grew up surrounded by glass towers in San Francisco, where affection was measured in dividends and worth was listed on stock tickers. Gregory Adams wasn't just my father. He was a brand. People admired him the way they admire skyscrapers, from a distance, dazzled by the shine, unaware of the cracks. I learned early to stay quiet, to not disturb the image he'd built of himself. The day I got into MIT, he opened a bottle of champagne and declared my future sealed. He spoke of legacy, of control, of carrying his empire forward, as if my life were another asset to manage. I nodded, pretending to agree, even as something inside me refused to belong to him. That summer, I placed my enlistment papers on the dinner table. He thought I was joking until I didn't laugh. The coffee cup in his hand trembled, spilling across the marble. His voice dropped, colder than the floor beneath us. "If you walk out that door, don't expect a cent." I told him I wasn't asking for one. That night, I packed a duffel, slipped my mother's photograph into the front pocket, and left. The rain hit the bus windows like applause from ghosts, steady and hollow. I looked back only once, at the city that had raised me but never made me feel seen. Years later, I learned what he'd buried along with my mother's ambitions. She'd been an Air Force engineer before he made her quit. He called it her moment of weakness. I called it theft. And when I enlisted, I understood. I wasn't escaping my father's world. I was finishing the life my mother never got to live. Colorado Springs taught me discipline the way altitude teaches lungs to fight for air. The days were long, the nights sharper than the mountain wind. I sent a letter to my father every month, not out of hope, but out of habit. None ever came back. The silence became its own kind of answer. When I missed him, I read my mother's old note, the one written in looping blue ink. "Don't fight for approval, fight for purpose." It became my compass when everything else blurred. Years passed before I was assigned overseas. Afghanistan smelled like dust and jet fuel, the kind of air that clings to your skin. One night, during a drone mission, our system went dark, no signal, no control. The UAV crashed a few hundred meters away. Private Ryan Ellis, 22, from Ohio, died in the blast. The logs showed the error came from the drone's control software. Atlas Core Technology, my father's company. The code had been altered to save energy and money. I filed a report. 48 hours later, it disappeared from the database like it had never existed. I didn't understand then, but I do now. Years later, I would uncover the truth. Gregory Adams had used his influence to close the investigation and protect his stock value. He chose profit over a soldier's life. That was the night I stopped writing letters. Instead, I wrote after-action reports, mission logs, and oaths. I rose in rank. I learned composure, but inside, a different war kept breathing. One day, I swore that if I ever stood in a position to make the truth seen, I wouldn't raise my voice. I'd simply stand where he'd be forced to look up and see me. Years after the desert, the world stopped shooting at me, but reports still sounded like shrapnel. At Peterson, I read them the way others read headlines, slowly, looking for the truth between the lines. That morning, the inbox banner landed like an order. Atlas Core shortlisted for a $7 billion contract. Review led by me. The number hit different. $7 billion wasn't ledger entries. It was reputation, influence, a monument my father had spent a lifetime erecting, and the same company's code had once killed one of my people. I called Ethan and met him in a cramped D.C. coffee shop, his tie loosened, his eyes tired. I pushed the old error log across the table. He didn't deny signing it. He admitted my father had insisted on the change, said it was a business decision, said it wouldn't matter. It mattered to Ryan Ellis. It mattered enough to disappear the investigation 2 days after I filed it. Ethan warned me, if I made this public, I wouldn't just be against my father. I'd be against a system that preferred contracts over accountability. The wind outside felt like mortar fire. If this was war, it would have to be a war of exposure. 2 weeks later, my mother died. The house smelled of her lavender and regret. He was absent, predictably wrapped in travel and schedules, sorting through her things. I found a folded note in her handwriting and, beneath it, a stack of original reports she had hidden away. Her letter asked me to choose truth over comfort. The reports confirmed the worst. Signatures attesting safety, names I recognized, and my father's initial on the cover page. She had kept them, maybe hoping I'd need them someday. Night bled into dawn as I read everything. The city outside was cold and indifferent. I left with her letter tucked in my pack and the file under my arm, aware I had flipped a switch I could not undo. Then Ethan's text came through. Your father knows about the file. He wants to see you at the gala. I closed my phone and let a small and steady smile form. Neither of us was who we used to be. The plane dropped through a sky as hard and gray as steel, and the city below glimmered like a warning. Washington had always been his world. Glass towers, sharp suits, quiet power. But this time, I wasn't here to visit. I was being summoned. At the Pentagon, the air felt sterilized, the kind that carries authority and secrets in equal measure. The security director briefed me in a voice too calm for what he was saying. The Defense Innovation Gala was set for the weekend. I'd be representing the Air Force Oversight Committee. Atlas Core, he added, would be among the presenting contractors. Among... I almost laughed. There was never an among where my father was concerned. There was only first, only Atlas Core, only him. The gala would be his stage, and for the first time, I'd be standing on it. Not as his daughter, but as the one person who could end the empire he worshipped more than family. The corridors hummed with fluorescent light as I walked back to my office, the sound of my boots counting down to confrontation. That night, I opened the folder my mother had left behind. Her handwriting marked one corner, soft and deliberate. Approved, G. Adams. Her words echoed in my head. Choose truth over comfort, right over ease. Tomorrow, I whispered, I'd choose both. My phone buzzed. Ethan's message blinked through the screen. My father was preparing to declare the Atlas Core contract secured at the gala. He didn't think I'd show. I typed back one line. Then he's about to be surprised. Later, I discovered the defense files I'd submitted had been intercepted by a legal advisor with a quiet stake in Atlas Corps. Someone inside the system had clipped my wings. I rerouted the evidence directly to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, the man scheduled to attend the gala beside me. Another file from Ethan arrived, emails proving my father had manipulated senators for funding years ago. Each line stripped away any illusion of redemption left in him. There was no way back. Outside, the city gleamed under a wet haze, reflecting light like it was made of glass and guilt. Tomorrow wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about truth standing in the open, finally unafraid. Union Center looked the same, polished marble and chandeliers heavy with gold light, but the air was charged now, humming with a tension I could taste. The last time I stood in this building, I was invisible. Tonight, every step I took echoed. The attendants nodded as I passed in full dress uniform, the ceremonial sword at my side catching slivers of light. My heartbeat matched the quiet rhythm of the orchestra, tuning up in the distance. I didn't look toward the stage until I heard his voice. My father stood under the spotlight, shaking hands, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. He spoke about progress, innovation, the brilliance of the Atlas Corps legacy. Then, like a reflex, he turned his charm into cruelty. "My daughter serves in the Air Force," he said, "and at least it keeps her rent paid." Laughter rippled through the room, until the MC's next announcement froze it mid-breath. The Air Force Oversight Committee is honored to welcome Brigadier General Danielle Adams. My heels struck the marble like gunfire. Every head turned. His didn't, not at first, until the light from my medals caught the rim of his glass. He turned. The glass fell. The Chief of Staff met me halfway, extending a hand. "We're proud to have you lead oversight tonight," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. Cameras flashed like lightning. I saluted the flag, not the man who'd built his fortune on lies. I took the microphone, steady and calm. "Progress without integrity isn't progress," I said. "It's danger dressed up to sell." No applause followed, only the sound of truth landing where it belonged. The Chief of Staff nodded once. "Well said, General." Then the first twist struck. The Atlas Corps presentation began, but the projector screen shifted, its feed replaced by the leaked file. The room went still as my father's signature filled the wall. G. Adams. The report of the drone failure glowed against a backdrop of gold and shame. He turned to me, his face drained. "What did you do? What you taught me?" I answered quietly. "Protect the brand. Only this one's called truth." Before the event ended, the Chief of Staff leaned toward me. "Your testimony's scheduled before Congress next week." I nodded. "I'll be there." As the crowd thinned, I walked toward the exit. Behind me came his voice, strained and breaking. "Danielle." I stopped, didn't turn. "You think you've won," he called out. "You just destroyed everything I built." I faced him then, the hall lights glinting along the edge of my sword. "Maybe you built it wrong." Outside, rain swept the steps, cold against my skin. For the first time in 20 years, turning away from him didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like breathing. Tomorrow, I thought, he'll finally have to look up to me, not because I outrank him, but because I still remember what a soul is worth. The halls of Congress smelled like polish and pressure. Reporters lined the corridors, their cameras blinking red, waiting for history or scandal. I walked past them in uniform, every step echoing down the carpeted aisle until the doors closed behind me. Inside, the lights were merciless. Gregory Adams sat at the witness table, a black suit swallowing what was left of his confidence. He looked older now, smaller, though the eyes were the same, the kind that once dismissed, commanded, destroyed. The chairwoman called my name, giving me the floor. My voice stayed even, almost calm, though every word felt like pulling a pin. I asked if he was aware that Atlas Corps' altered code had killed 3 soldiers. He drew a breath, said they were isolated incidents. I cut in before he could hide behind language. His engineers had followed his cost directives. He had erased the investigation. The silence that followed was heavy enough to break ribs. He started again. He did what was necessary to protect. What? I asked. His reputation or his conscience? Then I told them about Private Ryan Ellis, the soldier who died in my arms. The room went still. My father looked at me, and for the first time in my life, he had no defense. Ethan Moore entered as a voluntary witness, voice shaking as he admitted my father ordered the deletions and forced him to falsify the report. Gasps rolled through the chamber. The chairwoman read the findings. Atlas Corps suspended. The contract canceled. A full criminal investigation underway. When asked for a final statement, Gregory lifted his head, voice cracked and small. He thought power could buy safety, he said. He was wrong. I nodded once and answered quietly that I was wrong too, thinking silence could fix anything. As I left, cameras burst like lightning. A reporter shouted, wanting to know what I would say to my father now. I didn't slow down. Some truths, I said, are too loud for words. A year passed before the noise settled. At Andrews, life ran on the rhythm of engines, takeoffs, landings, the measured heartbeat of discipline. People said the hearing had made me a face on the cover of Time, but that kind of fame felt like someone else's name stitched onto my uniform. Real honor wasn't on magazine stands. It was in waking each morning able to meet my own reflection without flinching. When the Virginia Veterans Center invited me to speak, I expected another polite event. Handshakes, small talk, applause that meant nothing. Instead, I walked into a cafeteria that smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant, the kind of scent that clings to humility. And there he was, Gregory Adams, in a faded apron, pouring coffee for a soldier missing half a leg. He noticed me and froze for half a breath, then smiled. They call me Rich here, not Sir, he said. I like that better. The man who once commanded boardrooms now wiped counters and refilled cups, and somehow, he looked more complete than I'd ever seen him. I told him I hadn't come to watch him fall. He chuckled, shaking his head. I didn't fall, he said softly. I just learned where the ground is. We sat together in the corner, the hum of laughter and conversation filling the silence between us. A young veteran rolled by, patting his shoulder. Good pour today, Rich. My father laughed, an unguarded, human sound I didn't recognize. Then he slid a small envelope across the table. I sold Atlas Corps, he whispered. The money's gone. Inside were papers, documents for the Evelyn Foundation, a scholarship fund for veterans' children in technical studies. She deserved her name back, he said. My throat tightened. She'd be proud. I managed. He nodded, eyes wet. So am I. Finally. No apologies were exchanged. None were needed. Sometimes forgiveness isn't spoken. It's shared in the quiet when both people finally stop fighting. Winter came quietly, the kind that muffles sound and slows time. He died in his sleep. No headlines, no public mourning, just a small service at Arlington under a gray sky. The flag was folded with precision and placed in my hands, its weight steadier than grief. Before the funeral, an envelope had arrived at my quarters. Inside, a single sentence written in his uneven hand, proud to be your father. Finally, I folded it carefully and tucked it into the drawer beside my mother's service badge. For the first time in years, the silence between them felt complete, almost peaceful. Snow drifted over the graves as I saluted, not to the man he was, but to the redemption he had earned at last. The wind caught the flag, lifting it just enough to remind me that some things, once broken, can still rise. A month later, I returned to the Air Force Academy to teach leadership and integrity. It felt strange to stand where young cadets still believed the world could be made fair by effort alone. After class, a student lingered behind, her face bright with questions I once had. Ma'am, what do you do when no one believes in you? I smiled, hearing the echo of my younger self. You don't prove them wrong, I told her. You outgrow them. Outside the window, the Evelyn Bridge glimmered through the snowfall, the last project my father completed before his death, arching over the Potomac like an apology cast in steel. Light shimmered across the frozen river, splitting into two silver lines, twin reflections of the stars on my shoulders. I whispered to the empty room, more to the air than anyone still listening. Revenge fades, but honor stays. Then I stepped outside, boots sinking into the soft snow. The cold no longer bit, the past no longer chased. Only one truth remained, quiet and solid beneath the winter sky. When honor endures, the past finally lets go, 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 finally lets go.